Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. It was one of those nights when the rain seemed endless, turning the streets into mirrors of silver and shadow. I had been coming home late from work, my umbrella barely holding against the wind. My shoes were soaked, my coat heavy, and all I wanted was to slip into the warmth of my apartment where my husband, Daniel, would usually be reading in his chair by the fireplace. But as I turned onto our street, I stopped dead. There, at the corner near the old bookstore, stood a man in the rain, no umbrella, no hat, water streaming down his face. And for one heart-stopping moment, I thought it was Daniel. The build, the posture, even the way his hands were stuffed in his coat pockets, it was all the same. He was looking straight at me as if he'd been waiting. I took a step forward, confused. Why would Daniel be standing out here in the storm? And why did he look so different? Then he smiled, a slow, knowing curve of his lips, and something in me told me this wasn't my husband. Still, I walked toward him, my pulse quickening. The closer I got, the more the subtle differences revealed themselves. The slightly sharper jawline, the deeper crease near his brow, the way his eyes seemed to study me with an intensity Daniel never had. Cold night to be wandering, he said, his voice lower, smoother. I thought you were... My words trailed off, my mind caught somewhere between disbelief and curiosity. I'm not him, he said, almost amused. But you look like you could use someone to walk you home. I should have said no. I should have walked past him without another glance. But instead, I found myself letting him fall into step beside me. His name was Michael. He told me he was new to the city, staying in a small apartment a few blocks away. We talked lightly at first, about the weather, the empty streets. But there was an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. Every time his eyes met mine, I felt something tighten my chest up. By the time we reached my building, the rain had eased and I should have said goodbye. But I didn't. We lingered under the awning, the air between us warm despite the damp chill. Michael stepped closer, close enough for me to see the droplets clinging to his lashes. You really thought I was him? He asked softly. I nodded. For a second. And did it disappoint you when you realized I wasn't? I didn't answer, not out loud. But my silence told him enough. From that night on, I saw Michael again. At first, it was by accident, passing each other on the street, running into him at the corner cafe. But soon those accidents turned into meetings. Long walks after dark. Conversations that dug deeper than I'd had with my husband in years. And the more I talked to him, the more I realized how much I'd been craving the way he looked at me. Like I was something worth studying. Worth wanting. It started with the smallest touches. His hand brushing mine when he passed me a coffee cup, the way his palm rested lightly against the small of my back when we crossed the street. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just starved for attention, but the truth was harder. I wanted him. The night it happened, the rain had returned, pouring so heavily we could barely hear ourselves speak. We ducked into a quiet little shop just to get out of it. The dim light, the smell of wet clothes and coffee, the way his eyes lingered on my lips, it all felt like the point of no return. He reached for my hand first, his fingers curling around mine with quiet certainty. I should have pulled away, but instead I stepped closer. And in that moment, the storm outside didn't matter. The only thing I felt was the heat of him, the way his breath brushed against my cheek. When he finally kissed me, it was slow, almost hesitant, as though he was waiting for me to change my mind. I told myself it was just one night, that I could lock it away and go back to my life with Daniel. But once you've crossed that line, it's never just one night. Michael became a shadow I carried with me everywhere. In the way my thoughts drifted during dinner. In the way I found excuses to leave the house alone. Every time I saw him, it was as if the rain was washing away pieces of my old life, leaving only this dangerous, impossible connection between us. All because one night I saw a man in the rain who wasn't my husband. The rain that night seemed to have seeped into my bones, but the real chill wasn't from the weather. It was from the way Michael had left me standing under the awning after that first kiss, his hand trailing down my arm before he stepped back into the storm without another word. I went upstairs to my apartment, but I didn't go straight in. I stood at the window, watching the empty street where he disappeared, wondering what kind of person I was becoming. Daniel was home, sitting in his usual chair, the glow of his tablet reflecting in his glasses. He looked up, smiled, asked how my day was, and I lied. That's how it began. The following weeks became a strange mix of normalcy and disruption. I made dinner, went to work, came home to my husband, and somewhere in between, I found Michael. It wasn't always in person. Sometimes it was a text, just a short, knowing line like raining again. Thinking of you. Other times it was in the way he'd appear in places I didn't expect, leaning against the counter at the cafe, browsing the shelves of the bookstore. Our conversations deepened, each one pulling me further away from Daniel without me fully realizing it. Michael had a way of listening, not just nodding along, but really hearing me, as if every word I said mattered. I told him things I hadn't told anyone. The loneliness I'd felt, even in marriage. The parts of myself I put away because they didn't fit the version of me I thought I had to be. One evening, the rain was particularly heavy, and Daniel texted to say he'd be late at work. Without thinking twice, I went to the cafe on 5th Street. I knew Michael might be there. And he was sitting at a corner table, his damp coat hanging on the back of his chair, a book open in front of him, but clearly unread. He smiled when he saw me, that same slow, warm smile that felt like a secret. I sat across from him, but within minutes, he reached across the table and took my hand. His thumb brushed over my knuckles, sending a quiet, steady pulse through me. We stayed there until closing, the world outside swallowed by rain. When we finally left, instead of saying goodbye, he walked with me in silence until we reached a narrow alley near the bookstore. The air smelled of wet stone and earth. Without a word, he pulled me in, pressing me against the wall, the rain dripping from his hair onto my face. His kiss this time was different, urgent, searching, as if the space between us had been building. For too long, I didn't resist. My hands were in his hair, his were holding me as if letting go wasn't an option. When I finally pulled away, breathless, he just looked at me. "You don't have to keep pretending you don't want this," he said softly. I walked home that night feeling both light and unbearably heavy. Every step was filled with guilt and longing in equal measure. Daniel was asleep when I got back, his breathing slow and steady, as if nothing in the world could touch us. But something had touched us, something that had started with a stranger. In the rain and was now pulling me into a current I wasn't sure I wanted to escape. From then on, it became harder to keep my worlds separate. Michael and I met more often, in the park at night, in small restaurants where no one knew us, in quiet corners where the rest of the world couldn't see. He had a way of making me feel alive, like I'd been walking in grayscale for years. And he was color, yet the more I let myself fall into him, the more I felt the walls of my life with Daniel closing in. One night, Daniel came home early and found me sitting by the window, staring out at the rain. "You've been distracted lately," he said gently. "Is something wrong?" I almost told him. The words almost came. But then my phone buzzed, a message from Michael. "Meet me, I need to see you." And just like that, the choice I didn't want to make was made for me. Daniel's question lingered in the air that night, long after I crawled into bed beside him. Is something wrong? The truth was sitting right there on the tip of my tongue, but my mind built a wall faster than my heart could climb over it. I told him I was just tired. He accepted it with a kiss to my forehead, turned over, and fell asleep. I lay there wide awake, the soft glow of my phone lighting up the nightstand as Michael's message burned in my mind. I slipped out of bed, moving like a shadow, careful not to wake him. The rain had quieted outside, reduced to a soft drizzle. That misted the streets. I walked fast, almost as if afraid that my courage might vanish before I reached him. Michael was waiting at the same cafe, though it was long closed. He stood outside under the awning, hands shoved deep in his pockets, his eyes catching the streetlight when he looked up at me. For a moment, we just stared at each other, no words, no plan, just the hum of something inevitable pulling us together. When I reached him, he didn't say hello. He simply stepped forward, cupped my face in his hands, and kissed me like the world might end if he stopped. It was messy, wet from the rain, and completely unrestrained. My heart hammered in my chest. We walked, not caring where. Somewhere between the quiet streets and the soft lamplight, I realized this was the point where I could still stop everything. I could tell him I couldn't do this anymore, that I had a marriage, a home, a life that couldn't be rewritten on a whim. But every time I opened my mouth to speak, he'd glance at me with that look, the one that said he saw me in a way no one else ever had. And the words would vanish. We ended up in the park, the same park where we'd first truly talked weeks ago. The grass was damp, and the benches glistened under the light rain. We sat close, our shoulders touching, his hand finding mine like it had always belonged there. "I think about you all the time," he murmured, his voice low, "even when I'm supposed to be thinking about anything else." I laughed softly, though it wasn't amusement, it was nerves, guilt, and something dangerously close to joy. "You shouldn't say things like that," I whispered. "Why?" he asked, turning toward me. "Because they're true?" I didn't answer. My silence was enough of an answer for him. The weeks that followed blurred together in a rhythm that both thrilled and terrified me. Work, home, stolen moments with Michael. I'd meet him on my lunch breaks, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for nothing more than a walk down a side street where our hands could brush without anyone noticing. At night, while Daniel read in bed, I pretend to be on my phone for work, sending messages to Michael instead. The danger of it made my pulse race. The safety of it made my heart ache. But there were cracks forming, moments when I'd catch Daniel watching me with an unreadable expression, or when I'd hear my own voice sounding distant and cold in conversations with him. I tried to tell myself I could balance both worlds if I was careful enough, that I could keep Michael as my secret escape without letting the truth spill into my marriage. That illusion shattered one Friday evening. Daniel had gone to a dinner with his colleagues, and I met Michael at a small wine bar on the edge of town. The place was dimly lit, the hum of low jazz in the background, our table tucked away in a shadowed corner. I remember how his knee brushed mine, how his laughter felt like something I wanted to bottle. We were leaning closer when my phone buzzed on the table. It was Daniel. On my way home. Dinner ended early. I froze, the words hitting me like cold water. Michael's hand covered mine, steady and warm, but I could feel the reality pressing. And I was running out of ways to keep my life from colliding. I left quickly, hailing a cab and rehearsing a story in my head. By the time I stepped into our apartment, Daniel was already home. He was in the kitchen, setting down takeout containers. "You might be hungry," he said, smiling in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. Dinner was quiet, too quiet. He asked about my day, and I gave the version I prepared. He nodded along, but something about the way he watched me made my stomach twist. That night, lying in bed, I realized there would come a point where I'd have to choose, and deep down, I already knew which way my heart was leaning. The terrifying part was admitting it. Daniel's quiet. Suspicion grew like a shadow that refused to leave the room. For the next week, he wasn't himself. He didn't accuse me, didn't even ask directly, but there was a heaviness in the way he spoke, and how his eyes followed me a second too long. He seemed to notice every time I reached for my phone, every time my smile came too quickly or not at all. Michael, on the other hand, had become my refuge. We met more often now, a dangerous escalation neither of us talked about, but both craved. There was something reckless about the way we moved together, like we were both trying to outrun the same storm. One rainy Thursday, I told Daniel I had to stay late for a project. Instead, I met Michael in the old library across town, a place that always smelled faintly of dust and paper. We sat on the worn leather couch in the back corner, talking in low voices while the rain pattered against the tall windows. At some point, our conversation faded into silence. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His touch so gentle it almost undid me. "You're somewhere else right now," he murmured. "I'm here," I whispered, though part of me knew that was a lie. I was both there with him, and still tangled in the life I'd built with Daniel. I couldn't escape one without breaking the other. Michael looked at me for a long time, then took my hand. "If I asked you to choose right now, would you?" The question hung in the air, heavy, impossible. I didn't answer, and he didn't push, but something in his eyes told me he understood my silence. When I got home later that night, Daniel was waiting in the living room. The TV was off, the lights dim. "You weren't at work," he said evenly. My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "I called," he continued, his voice calm in a way that was more dangerous than shouting. "Your office said you left hours ago." I froze. 100 excuses raced through my head, but each one felt too thin, too breakable. "I went for a walk," I said finally. "I needed some air." Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "Alone?" The silence that followed felt like a crack splitting through the center of our marriage. I forced a nod, but the way he looked at me told me he didn't believe a word. That night, I lay awake long after he fell asleep, staring at the ceiling. My mind kept circling the same truth. This couldn't go on. The tension was becoming unbearable. The next day, Michael texted me to meet him. We ended up at the park again, the winter air biting at our cheeks. I told him everything, that Daniel was starting to suspect, that I couldn't keep lying without losing my mind. "What are you saying?" Michael asked quietly. "I'm saying I need to decide," I said, my voice trembling. "And I don't know if I'm brave enough to choose you." Michael looked at me for a long time before nodding slowly. "Then you need to figure out what you can live with and what you can't." I went home that evening feeling like I was carrying two different lives on my shoulders. Daniel greeted me with a strained smile, and for a moment, I imagined telling him everything: the rain, the cafe, the way Michael's presence felt like breathing after years underwater. But ID in single quotes T. Instead, I sat across from him at dinner. Both of us pretending the air wasn't thick with questions. Neither of us dared to ask what. I didn't know then was that the choice I'd been avoiding would come for me sooner than I was ready for, and it would come in a way that would leave none of us the same. 3 days passed without me seeing Michael, and every hour felt heavier than the last. Daniel was watching me more closely now, not in an openly accusatory way, but with the quiet vigilance of someone waiting for proof. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a jolt in my chest, half from hope and half from fear. On the 4th day, Michael finally texted, "I can't keep my distance anymore. Can we talk tonight?" I stared at the message for a long time before replying. An hour later, I told Daniel I was going for a late grocery run. The lie left my lips too easily, and guilt stung me even before I walked out the door. But when I saw Michael waiting by his car near the old library, leaning casually against the door with his hands in his pockets, the guilt shifted into something else entirely. He opened the passenger door for me, and the moment I slid in, the world outside seemed to fade. We drove without speaking, the silence thick with unspoken things. He took me to a quiet overlook on the edge of town, a place I didn't even know existed, where the city lights shimmered in the distance like a reflection of the stars above. We sat there for a while, both of us staring out at the view. The cold night air carried the faint scent of pine and damp earth. "I've missed you," he said finally, his voice low, almost reluctant. The confession pulled something loose in me. "I've missed you too," I admitted. He turned to look at me then, his eyes searching mine as if trying to find the answer to a question he couldn't quite ask. "Every time I tell myself to let you go, I see your face, and I can't. You've gotten under my skin in a way that scares me." I didn't know whether to feel flattered or terrified, so I said nothing. Instead, I reached for his hand. The moment our fingers touched, it felt like coming home after a long winter. We didn't speak for a long time. He pulled me closer, and I let my head rest against his shoulder. The warmth of him seeped into me, quieting the ache that had been growing for days. When I finally looked up, his face was inches from mine. The world around us disappeared. The lights, the cold, the distance between who we were supposed to be and what we had become. His hand brushed my cheek, and the tenderness in that touch made my chest tighten. "Tell me this isn't one-sided," he whispered. "It's not," I said, my voice barely audible. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, caught in that fragile space where love and danger are tangled so tightly you can't tell them apart. The passion wasn't in rushed movements or desperate grabs. It was in the way we looked at each other as if memorizing every detail, every breath, because we didn't know how much longer we had. Eventually, he pulled me into an embrace that felt like both a question and an answer. I could hear his heartbeat, steady but strong, as if it were trying to convince me to be brave. When I finally pulled away, the city lights seemed dimmer than before. "I should go," I said, though. The words hurt to say. "I know," he replied, but he didn't let go right away. On the drive home, I kept my hand in his, hidden between us on the seat. Neither of us spoke, but the silence felt different this time. Not empty, but full. When I walked back into the house, Daniel was in the kitchen, his arms folded, eyes fixed on me. "You were gone a long time," he said simply. I forced a smile. "They were out of milk." I had to go to another store. Daniel didn't respond. He just watched me for a few seconds, then turned away. And in that moment, I realized the line between my two lives was thinner than ever, and one day soon, it would shatter.